Hi, dreamers. Welcome to English Story School. Part 1. The Beginning of Mockery. What do you do when the whole world laughs at you? When your very existence feels like a stage where the audience doesn't clap, but sneers? For Ava, this wasn't an occasional bad day. It was her everyday reality. She was that girl in school who never seemed to belong. Her shoes weren't the latest brand, her clothes weren't trendy, and her accent carried the weight of a background people chose to ridicule instead of respect. To her classmates, she was an easy target, someone who didn't fight back, someone whose silence made bullying even easier. The whispers chased her down every hallway like shadows. The cruel laughter echoed louder than her voice, making her shrink into corners, clutching her books like shields that never worked. Teachers sometimes noticed, but they didn't always intervene. And even when they did, the mocking never stopped. It just shifted, becoming quieter, sharper, more poisonous. The cruelest part wasn't the bullying itself. It was what it did to her mind. Slowly, Ava began to believe them. She began to think maybe she was nothing. Maybe she didn't deserve to be respected. Maybe she didn't deserve to be seen. That belief cut deeper than any insult, because when the world convinces you that you're worthless, you stop fighting for yourself. And yet, hidden in that pain was something extraordinary. Pain didn't just break Ava, it carved her into someone who felt deeply. Every insult was a scar, but scars don't just mark you. They remind you you're still alive. And Ava was alive, even if she didn't yet know how to live. One afternoon, sitting in the cafeteria alone, she overheard a group of girls at the next table laughing about her shoes. Did her grandma give her those? One of them mocked. Ava pretended not to hear, but her cheeks burned. She looked down at those worn-out shoes and thought, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here. But then something inside her whispered, faint but unshakable, or maybe I'm more than this. It was the first spark, a seed buried deep under the soil of humiliation, pushing against the weight of mockery. Because here's the truth. Every seed is buried before it rises. Nobody in that cafeteria saw the storm Ava would one day become. Nobody saw the strength being born in silence. Nobody saw the girl with downcast eyes secretly daring herself to rise. At night, in her small room with peeling wallpaper, she let the tears fall freely. She let the hurt pour out of her chest until she could breathe again. And then, when her voice was just a whisper, she said words that carried more power than she realized. One day, you'll remember my name. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a speech. It was a promise, fragile but unbreakable. A vow to herself. Ava didn't yet know what she was capable of. She didn't yet know the fire that would one day burn through her bones. But that night marked a turning point. She picked up a notebook from her desk, the one she usually used for doodling, and for the first time, she wrote. Not schoolwork, not assignments, her truth. She wrote every insult she remembered. She wrote how it made her feel. She wrote the weight of the laughter that haunted her. And then she flipped the page, and for each insult, she wrote what she wished someone had told her instead. You're ugly, they had said. On the next page, she wrote, You're different, and different is powerful. You're stupid, she wrote. Your mind just works in ways they don't understand yet. You'll never matter. She wrote, Watch me. Page after page, her pain became ink. Ink became fire. Fire became hope. And in that small act, Ava had unknowingly started the process of transformation. No, she didn't suddenly become strong overnight. The laughter didn't stop. The whispers didn't vanish. But for the first time, Ava had something stronger than their cruelty. She had a vision. She had a promise. And promises, once planted in the heart, grow roots deeper than anyone can pull out. The next day at school, when the same boys snickered as she walked past, she still felt the sting, but she didn't shrink as much. She walked with her head just slightly higher. It wasn't confidence yet, but it was defiance. A tiny rebellion against the world that told her she was less. She didn't know it then, but every step she took in pain was training her for a future no one could imagine. Because the very world that mocked her would one day stand in awe of her. The girl they ridiculed would rise into the woman no one could touch. But before that, before triumph, before respect, before victory, came the hardest part: enduring. Holding on when the world wanted her broken. Fighting a war no one else could see. Ava wasn't ready yet, but life was already shaping her, sharpening her edges, building her from the ground up. Because sometimes the most powerful people don't start as winners. They start as the laughed at, the underestimated, the forgotten. And that's what makes their rise unforgettable. So if you're listening to this and you've ever felt like Ava, mocked, underestimated, pushed aside, remember this. Your pain is not your prison. It's your preparation. And Ava, she was just beginning. Part 2, the fire within. Ava didn't wake up the next morning magically transformed. Life doesn't hand out miracles that easily. Strength isn't a gift. It's a construction. And Ava, she was about to become her own architect. She built herself brick by brick in silence, in shadows, while the world slept. Her enemies thought they had broken her. What they didn't know was this: broken pieces can cut sharper than anything whole. Ava decided she would not stay shattered. She would turn those pieces into armor. She started small. She began reading books no one else cared about. While others filled their nights with gossip or TV, Ava filled hers with pages of biographies, philosophies, and lessons from people who had turned rejection into greatness. Each page whispered to her, "You are not alone." Others were mocked too. Others rose anyway. Then came discipline. She stayed up nights practicing skills no one thought she'd ever need. Public speaking, writing, even coding on a beat-up old laptop. Things far outside the box her classmates had locked her into. She stumbled. She failed. She got frustrated, but every failure became fuel. Every frustration whispered, "Keep going. They'll remember your name." And mornings? While the same classmates who laughed at her slept in comfort, Ava was outside running. Her feet hit the pavement like war drums. She wasn't just running for fitness. She was running to outrun her past, outrun their voices, outrun the chains of who they said she was. The cold air cut her lungs, her legs burned, but that pain was different. It wasn't humiliation, it was progress. Her pain became her gym. Her anger became her teacher. Every insult replayed in her head became a rep, a sprint, a reason to go further. And then, one day, something clicked. She realized the truth most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The world doesn't owe you respect. You have to demand it. Not with your words, but with your work. So Ava worked, harder than anyone thought possible. She taped a quote above her desk, one that kept her alive when the weight felt unbearable. "They laughed at me, because I was different. I'll rise because I refuse to be like them. That quote became her battle cry. When exhaustion tempted her to quit, she repeated it under her breath like a mantra. When loneliness dug into her ribs, she whispered it like a prayer. And every time she did, her resolve thickened. The funny thing about people is this: they notice when you change. They may not say out loud at first, but they see it. They feel it. They sense the shift. Slowly, the same classmates who mocked her began whispering again. But this time, it wasn't with laughter. It was with confusion. Why does she look unbreakable now? They couldn't understand it. This was the girl they used to tear apart for fun. The girl whose name was a punchline. But suddenly, she wasn't bowing her head anymore. She walked through the hallways with a quiet confidence. Not arrogance, confidence. That subtle energy that makes people wonder what you know that they don't. Her silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was power. Because now, every time she kept quiet, it wasn't out of fear. It was out of choice. And that choice unsettled them more than any comeback ever could. Ava didn't need a clap back. She didn't need to explain herself. Her presence began speaking louder than their words. One afternoon in class, when the teacher asked a difficult question, no one raised their hand. To everyone's shock, Ava did. Not only did she answer, it was correct, articulate, and confident. For the first time, the room didn't laugh. It went silent. And in that silence, Ava realized, I'm not the same girl anymore. I'm becoming the woman I was always meant to be. But here's the thing about transformation. It doesn't come without resistance. Some classmates tried to double down. They whispered harsher insults, mocked her new habits, tried to drag her back into the box she was breaking out of. But Ava had already crossed a line in her own soul. Their words no longer pierced her. They fueled her. Because once you've discovered your fire, no amount of wind can blow it out. She remembered another line she had scribbled in her notebook late one night. They don't laugh because you're weak. They laugh because they see your strength before you do. And that realization set her free. So she kept building. While they wasted time chasing validation, she chased progress. While they fought to fit in, she fought to stand out. And every day, the whispers grew softer, not because they stopped talking, but because her inner voice had finally grown louder. The fire within Ava was no longer a spark. It was an inferno, and it was only a matter of time before the world saw the flames. Because the girl everyone mocked was no longer just surviving. She was rising. Part 3, the battles and the breakthroughs. Life doesn't reward effort immediately. It tests you, stretches you, and asks again and again, how badly do you want it? Ava discovered that truth the hard way. Her growth wasn't a straight line. It was a battlefield. Everywhere she turned, doors slammed in her face. She walked into job interviews dressed with hope, only to see interviewers glance at her resume and dismiss her before she even finished speaking. They smiled politely, but their eyes screamed, "You're not what we're looking for." At competitions, her work was brushed aside. She poured nights of effort into projects, only to lose to people who hadn't even tried half as hard. She stood backstage, clapping for winners, while her own name never left the announcer's lips. Each time, the sting grew sharper. Each time, her chest felt heavier. But instead of folding, Ava sharpened. She stopped asking the world for permission to be great. She decided she would earn it, inch by inch, fight by fight. Every rejection became fuel. Every no added to the fire inside her chest. Failure wasn't her enemy anymore. It was her coach. She began to see setbacks not as walls, but as weights, heavy, painful, but building her strength. And in those nights when her pillow carried the weight of silent tears, she reminded herself of one thing. Pain is not punishment. Pain is preparation. It became her philosophy. Still, there were moments that nearly broke her. Days where her reflection looked back at her with doubt. Nights where she asked the ceiling, "Am I crazy for still believing in myself? Am I fighting for something that doesn't even exist?" But the next morning, she always got up. Because even if the world wasn't clapping yet, she couldn't bear to go back to the version of herself who believed the mockery. Then came the moment that changed everything. One day, she was invited to speak at a small event. Just a local gathering. No cameras, no lights, no promise of glory. She almost said no. What could she possibly say that mattered? But something inside whispered, "This is your test." So she said yes. When the day came, Ava stood backstage, palms sweating, knees shaking. Her heart pounded against her rib cage like it wanted to escape. She wasn't ready. She felt the old fear clawing at her throat. The fear of laughter, the fear of eyes judging her, the fear of failing yet again. But she stepped out anyway. The stage wasn't grand. The microphone crackled. The audience was just a few rows of chairs filled with strangers. And, ironically, a few familiar faces from her past. The very people who once turned her name into a punchline were sitting there, arms crossed, waiting. Her voice trembled at first. She spoke about rejection, about loneliness, about the kind of pain that keeps you awake at night. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't try to sound perfect. She let the rawness bleed into her words. And slowly, something magical happened. The audience leaned in. Eyes that were bored at the start now burned with attention. Some nodded. Some bit their lips. Some, she noticed, even had tears forming. Ava's voice grew steadier, stronger, louder. She spoke about resilience, not as a pretty motivational word, but as survival. She spoke about pain, not as a tragedy, but as a teacher. She spoke about mockery, not as a curse, but as the fire that forged her. Her final words echoed through the small hall. They laughed at me when I was weak. They doubted me when I was lost. But the truth is this: mockery does not define you. Your response does. For a moment, silence filled the room. And then it came. Applause. Not the forced kind, not the polite claps people give out of obligation. No, this was real. It was loud, raw, and heavy with respect. Ava stood there, stunned. The same people who once laughed now clapped. Not because she was perfect, not because she had become some flawless hero. They clapped because she was real, because she had turned her scars into a story, because she had dared to bleed on stage, and in doing so, she gave everyone else permission to face their own pain. She remembered words she once underlined in an old book, words that had carried her through so many dark nights. The strongest souls are the ones that bled in silence and rose without witnesses. And now she understood them in her bones. All those lonely nights, all those silent tears, all those invisible battles, this was what they were for. For the first time, Ava realized she wasn't fighting to prove them wrong anymore. She wasn't standing on that stage to shove her success in anyone's face. No, she was proving herself right. And that realization felt like freedom. Because the truth is, the greatest breakthrough doesn't come when the world finally claps for you. It comes when you no longer need the clapping to believe in yourself. From that day on, Ava's fire no longer burned for revenge. It burned for purpose. She had survived the mockery. She had endured the battles. And now, she was ready for the war of becoming who she was meant to be. Part 4. The transformation nobody expected. Years passed. The little girl with shaky hands and tear-stained cheeks was gone. Ava had grown into a woman, and not just any woman. She was the kind of presence you felt before you even saw her. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to demand attention. Her very existence carried a weight, a spark, a fire that couldn't be ignored. She was no longer that girl. She was no longer the joke, no longer the echo of whispers in school hallways. She had become a force. But here's the truth. Her transformation didn't come from money or fame or power in the shallow sense. No, Ava's transformation was something far deeper. Her spirit had become untouchable. When she walked into rooms now, people sat up straighter. Conversations shifted. Even silence bowed to her presence. She didn't need to speak for people to feel it. Her journey spoke louder than words. Her scars had turned into armor, her wounds into wisdom, and her pain into power. She built a career that mattered. She wasn't chasing titles or applause anymore. She was building things that lasted. She wrote, she spoke, she created spaces where others could breathe, heal, and grow. Her story became more than her own. It became a mirror for thousands who thought they were alone in their battles. And suddenly, the whispers were gone. Those cruel little voices that once followed her everywhere, silenced. In their place came something entirely new. Respect, admiration, awe. The same classmates who once mocked her clothes, her accent, her every move, now scrolled through her work online with wide eyes, unable to look away. The same interviewers who once brushed her aside would now have paid to sit in her workshops. The same neighbors who once raised eyebrows at her odd ways now spoke her name with reverence. But the sweetest irony? Those who once laughed at her couldn't even meet her eyes anymore. Because when you rise from the ashes, when you outgrow the box people try to shove you in, something happens. They realize they never knew you at all. And that realization terrifies them. Ava never gloated. She never walked up to her past tormentors and said, "See, I told you so." She didn't need to. Her existence was enough. Her presence was enough. Her success, silent, graceful, undeniable, was her loudest answer. Because here's the irony of life. The people who laugh at your start will be the ones speechless at your finish. And that's exactly what happened. There were moments when she'd walk into public events, and those same girls who once whispered behind her back now stood in the crowd, clapping with forced smiles. There were times when the boys who used to joke about her now sat quietly in corners, eyes down, pretending not to notice her. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't revenge. It was justice, the kind only time and persistence can deliver. But here's what made Ava truly extraordinary. She never let bitterness define her victory. She didn't use her success as a weapon. She used it as a torch. She reached out to others still stuck in the trenches. She gave her time to young women who felt like outsiders. She told them, I know what it feels like to be invisible. I know what it feels like to be laughed at. But I also know what it feels like to rise, and so will you. Her transformation wasn't just about her own healing. It was about making sure others believe healing was possible too. And yet, even with all the love she now received, Ava never forgot the nights she cried alone. She never forgot the pain that molded her. She carried it with her, not as a burden, but as a compass. Because pain had been her teacher, mockery had been her fire, rejection had been her forge. And now, every step she took was proof that she had learned her lessons well. People began calling her unstoppable, but the truth was she was untouchable. Not in the sense of being above others, but in the sense that no negativity, no mockery, no doubt could pierce her anymore. She had outgrown that version of herself. She had armored her heart with resilience, and no one, not the past, not the present, could strip it away. It was strange, really. She used to dream of this day, the day when her haters would finally shut their mouths, the day when she would walk tall while they shrank. But when the day finally came, she didn't care about them anymore, because the real transformation wasn't about silencing them. It was about freeing herself. And she was free. Ava once whispered in her darkest night, one day, you'll remember my name. Now, she didn't have to whisper anymore. The world remembered it, and the world said it with reverence. Her journey was no longer about mockery or revenge. It was about showing every broken soul out there that the story doesn't end in the laughter of others. It begins there. Because the truth is simple. Your mockers don't decide your destiny. Your response does. And Ava's response was legendary. Part 5. The lesson she left behind. So what do we truly take from Ava's journey? That life is not defined by the laughter of the crowd, but by the strength of the soul. That the voices which try to tear you down are not proof of your weakness. They are proof of your significance. People don't waste their energy mocking someone who doesn't matter. They laugh at you because, deep down, they sense your potential. And Ava, she was living proof of that. The world buried her under ridicule, but she didn't suffocate. She sprouted. They tried to convince her she was small, but she grew into something larger than their imagination could handle. Mockery became the very soil in which her resilience rooted itself. Pain became the water that kept her alive. And their laughter? It became the sunlight that reminded her to rise every single day. Because here's the thing most people don't realize. Every insult is energy. You decide whether it poisons you or fuels you. Ava chose fuel. Her memoir, written years after her transformation, was not a tale of bitterness, but of clarity. She wrote, "They mocked the girl. They couldn't touch the woman. Because while they wasted time laughing, I spent time building." And those words struck like lightning. Thousands who read her story cried, because they saw themselves in her. They remembered the classrooms where they felt invisible. They remembered the jobs where they were overlooked. They remembered the nights when they whispered to themselves, "Maybe I'm not enough." Ava's voice told them otherwise. She reminded the world that mockery does not mean you are worthless. It means you are worth noticing. That pain doesn't end your story, it begins it. That being laughed at doesn't close doors, it pushes you to build your own. Her story spread beyond books and speeches. It became a movement. Teachers quoted her to students. Parents whispered her lines to children. Even strangers online shared her words as if they were shields against their own storms. And here's what made it timeless. Ava never positioned herself as a hero above others. She didn't say, "Look at me, I did it, so I'm special." No, she said, "I was you. I am you. If I could rise, so can you." Because her journey wasn't just about survival. It was about transmission. She took the fire that once burned her and turned it into a torch for others. So the real question becomes, who are you listening to? The world will always have voices that mock you. The classroom snickers. The workplace whispers. The family doubts. The online trolls. They're loud, yes. They echo, yes. But they are not the truth. The truth is quieter. It's that voice inside you that whispers, "Keep going." That small but stubborn voice that says, "You're not done yet. You're building something." And here's what Ava proved. The crowd eventually falls silent, but that inner voice will carry you for a lifetime if you dare to listen. Because here's the truth people run from. The girl they mocked became unstoppable, and so can you. Imagine this. You're standing years from now, looking back at your life. Do you want to say, "I gave in because they laughed"? Or do you want to say, "I kept going, and now they can't touch me"? That's the choice. That's the test. That's the very heart of Ava's lesson. She taught us that revenge is not in proving them wrong. It's in proving yourself right. Success isn't shouting back. It's building so high that their laughter can't reach you anymore. And that's what makes her story unforgettable. Ava was not extraordinary because she never broke. She was extraordinary because she broke 1,000 times and rebuilt herself every single time stronger than before. She was not untouchable because she was perfect. She was untouchable because she owned her imperfections so completely that no one could use them against her anymore. That is her legacy. So now I turn it to you. Right here, right now. What will your legacy be? Will you spend your life bending under the weight of their laughter? Or will you rise so tall that laughter turns into silence? Silence turns into awe, and awe turns into respect? Because Ava's story isn't just a story, it's a mirror. And the reflection you see is your choice. Let me repeat her words once more, because they deserve to live beyond her book. They mocked the girl. They couldn't touch the woman. Because while they wasted time laughing, I spent time building. Now ask yourself, what are you building? Because the clock is ticking, the world is watching, and deep down, you already know this. The fire that burned Ava is burning in you too. You just have to let it guide you instead of destroy you. And when that happens, when you finally choose to listen to the voice inside, instead of the voices outside, you'll understand her final lesson. Mockery is not the end. It is the beginning of legends. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.